On July 20th, 1923, Pancho Villa climbed into his black Dodge automobile and left the town of peril. He believed the wars were behind him. He had survived dictators, betrayals, firing squads, civil war, and one of the largest manhunts in American history. But that morning, as his car entered a narrow street, a man raised his hand. It was the signal. Gunmen opened fire from several directions. Bullets tore through the vehicle. Villa's driver collapsed. The car crashed. And within seconds, the man who had once commanded tens of thousands of soldiers was dead. Pancho Villa had escaped the armies of Mexico. He had escaped American cavalry, trucks, airplanes, and scouts. But he could not escape the enemies waiting beside a quiet road. His killers believed they had ended his story. They were wrong, because death transformed Pancho Villa from a man into something far more powerful. A legend. To some, he became a hero of the poor. One to others, a violent bandit responsible for executions, raids, and terror. He was both revolutionary and outlaw, liberator and warlord. A man who fought tyranny while sometimes creating fear of his own. But how did a poor boy from rural Mexico rise to command one of the most powerful revolutionary armies in the Americas? How did he go from hiding in the mountains to entering Mexico City beside Emiliano Zapata? And why did the United States send thousands of soldiers across the border to hunt one man? The answer begins decades before Villa's assassination. It begins in a country that appeared peaceful, a country that appeared modern, a country that was already beginning to break. For more than 3 decades, Mexico was dominated by President Porfirio Diaz. Under Diaz, railroads spread across the landscape. Foreign investment increased. Mines expanded. Factories grew. Mexico's cities displayed electric lights, grand buildings, and symbols of progress. To wealthy landowners and foreign businessmen, Diaz brought stability. But beneath that stability was another Mexico. A Mexico of landless farmers. Indigenous communities pushed from ancestral territory. Workers trapped in debt. 2 political opponents silenced by prison, exile, or death. Much of the countryside was controlled by enormous estates known as haciendas. Millions worked the land. Very few owned it. Diaz had created order, but it was an order built for those already powerful. In the northern state of Durango, around 1878, a boy named Doroteo Arango was born into this world. The details of his early life are difficult to separate from legend. He grew up poor. His father died while Doroteo was still young. The family worked on land controlled by others. According to one famous version of the story, Doroteo became an outlaw after confronting a landowner who had threatened or assaulted his sister. Doroteo supposedly shot the man and fled into the mountains. Historians continue to debate exactly what happened. But something forced the young man outside the law. And once he entered the mountains, the old Doroteo Arango began to disappear. In his place emerged Francisco Villa. Later, the world would know him simply as Pancho Villa. He stole cattle, worked as a mule driver, joined bands of outlaws, learned hidden routes through the mountains and deserts of northern Mexico. 3. He learned which villages could provide food, which landowners had enemies, which officials could be bribed, and how quickly a man had to move when soldiers appeared on the horizon. These were not the lessons of a military academy, but they would later make Villa one of the most dangerous commanders in Mexico. He understood horses. He understood speed. Most importantly, he understood the anger of poor men. Pancho Villa might have remained a local outlaw. Then, in 1910, a wealthy but idealistic politician named Francisco Madero challenged Porfirio Diaz. Madero did not look like a warrior. He came from one of Mexico's richest families. He was small, softly spoken, and deeply interested in spiritualism. But he believed Diaz had ruled for too long. Madero demanded real elections. Diaz allowed him to campaign, then had him arrested. Diaz declared himself the winner of another election. But this time, the country did not remain silent. Madero escaped and called upon the Mexican people to rise on November 20th, 1910. His message moved across the country. In the south, Emiliano Zapata fought for land and village rights. For in the north, rebels gathered under leaders such as Pascual Orozco. And among them was Pancho Villa. Villa did not bring political theory. He brought men, horses, weapons, and an instinct for war. His reputation attracted followers. He attacked government forces and used his knowledge of the countryside to disappear before larger armies could surround him. Villa's men moved quickly. They struck railway lines, captured supplies, seized towns, and turned Diaz's own transportation network against him. The dictatorship had spent decades building railroads to control Mexico. The revolutionaries used those same railroads to destroy it. In May 1911, rebels captured Ciudad Juarez near the American border. The victory shattered the image of Diaz as an untouchable ruler. After more than 30 years in power, Porfirio Diaz resigned and sailed into exile. Crowds celebrated. Madero entered Mexico City as the leader of a new age. Many believed the revolution was over. But the fall of a dictator is not the same as the creation of a new country. Madero inherited a government filled with officials, officers, and institutions from the old regime. He wanted reform. But he feared complete destruction of the existing system. Revolutionaries who had risked everything expected immediate change. Land, justice, power. Instead, they received promises. Zapata turned against Madero, accusing him of betraying the peasants. Pascual Orozco also rebelled. Pancho Villa remained loyal to Madero. It was a loyalty that nearly killed him. To defeat Orozco, Madero sent federal forces under General Victoriano Huerta. Villa served in the campaign, but Huerta despised the former bandit. He viewed Villa as undisciplined, dangerous, and beneath the dignity of the regular army. After a dispute, Huerta accused Villa of disobedience and theft. Villa was sentenced to death. He stood close enough to the firing squad to understand that his revolution might end before it had truly begun. But Madero's intervention delayed the execution. Villa was sent to prison in Mexico City. Even there, he refused to remain trapped. In late 1912, he escaped and crossed into the United States. It was the first time Villa fled Mexico to save his life. It would not be the last time the border shaped his destiny. While Villa waited in exile, Mexico moved toward catastrophe. In February 1913, forces opposed to Madero launched a coup in Mexico City. For 10 days, artillery thundered through the capital. Civilians were trapped between rival armies. Buildings burned. Bodies filled the streets. Madero trusted General Victoriano Huerta to defend the government. Huerta betrayed him. He joined the conspiracy, arrested Madero, and seized power. Days later, Madero and Vice President José María Pino Suárez were murdered while supposedly being transferred to prison. The government claimed they had been killed during an escape attempt. Few believed it. Huerta had removed Mexico's elected president. Now he intended to rule through military force. For Pancho Villa, the murder was personal. Madero had saved his life. Villa now returned to Mexico to avenge him. At first, he crossed the border with only a small group of followers. But the North was ready to rise again. Ranchers joined him. Miners joined him. 7 railway workers, farmers, cowboys, craftsmen, and former outlaws joined him. Some wanted land. Some wanted revenge. Some wanted food. Others followed because Villa appeared capable of victory. His small force grew into the División del Norte, the Division of the North. It became one of the most powerful revolutionary armies in Mexican history. Villa was no longer simply leading raiders through the mountains. He commanded cavalry, artillery, supply trains, medical units, and railway crews. His soldiers traveled aboard captured trains. Locomotives carried horses, ammunition, cannons, food, and thousands of men across northern Mexico. Villa used the railway like a weapon. His army could appear hundreds of miles away before the enemy understood where the attack was coming. When tracks were destroyed, railway workers repaired them. When bridges were damaged, engineers rebuilt them. When Villa needed information, telegraph operators intercepted messages or spread false reports. This was not a wandering bandit army. It was a moving city built for war. Villa could be impulsive. He could be brutal. But he possessed an instinctive understanding of morale. He ate with soldiers, spoke their language, remembered faces, rewarded courage, and sometimes personally led charges that other commanders would have directed from safety. His men began calling him the Centaur of the North, a warrior who seemed almost fused to his horse. In 1913, Villa captured Ciudad Juarez through a bold surprise operation. His forces seized a train, used it to approach the city, and attacked before the defenders were prepared. He then captured Chihuahua City and became the temporary governor of the state. The former outlaw now controlled government offices, banks, railways, food supplies, and the property of some of the wealthiest families in northern Mexico. Villa confiscated large estates and used their resources to support his army and administration. He attempted to control food prices. He distributed supplies. He supported schools and placed military authority behind social measures. To supporters, this was justice. The wealth of the old elite was finally being used for ordinary people. 9 to his enemies, it was robbery backed by rifles. Both interpretations contained part of the truth. Villa's government depended on force. Men accused of betrayal could be executed. Property could disappear overnight. Personal anger could become military punishment. The revolution gave Villa power, but it did not always give him restraint. Still, his victories made him famous far beyond Mexico. Journalists crossed the border to meet him. Photographers captured his image. Film crews followed his army. Villa understood something many generals did not. A war was fought not only on battlefields. It was also fought in newspapers and on cinema screens. He signed an agreement allowing an American film company to record his forces. Later stories claimed that Villa staged battles or delayed attacks for better camera light. Many of those claims were exaggerated, but the cameras were real. And so was Villa's growing international celebrity. Americans watched moving images of a Mexican revolutionary while the revolution was still unfolding. Villa became one of the first military leaders of the modern media age. But fame could not decide who would rule Mexico. The struggle against Huerta was being led by a broader coalition known as the Constitutionalists. Its political leader was Venustiano Carranza. Carranza was very different from Villa. He was older, formal, proud, a landowner and politician who believed authority should flow through a national government. Villa believed authority belonged to the men who had won it in battle. The two men needed each other, but they did not trust each other. Carranza feared Villa's popularity and independence. Villa believed Carranza wanted to control the revolution without sharing its rewards. For the moment, they faced a common enemy, Victoriano Huerta. In June 1914, Villa's army advanced toward Zacatecas. The city stood on a strategic railway line. It was protected by mountains, artillery, and thousands of federal soldiers. Capturing it would open the road toward Mexico City. Carranza had attempted to limit Villa's role in the campaign. Villa ignored him. On June 23, the Division of the North attacked. Artillery hammered federal positions. 11 Villa's infantry climbed exposed slopes under heavy fire. Cavalry moved to cut off escape routes. The battle became a slaughter. Men fought over hills, trenches, and railway lines. When the federal defenses finally collapsed, retreating soldiers found their routes blocked. Thousands died. Zacatecas was one of Villa's greatest victories. It was also one of the bloodiest battles of the revolution. The defeat shattered Huerta's remaining military strength. Less than a month later, Huerta resigned and fled Mexico. Madero had been avenged. The dictator had fallen. Villa's army stood at the height of its power. And that was when the Revolutionary Alliance began to destroy itself. With Huerta gone, the question was no longer who would defeat the dictatorship. The question was who would control Mexico afterward. Carranza demanded obedience. Villa refused. Revolutionary leaders gathered at the Convention of Aguascalientes in 1914, hoping to prevent another war. Instead, the meeting divided the country. Villa accepted the authority of the convention. Emiliano Zapata also supported the conventionist cause. 12 Carranza rejected it. Álvaro Obregón, one of Mexico's most capable generals, remained with Carranza. The revolution split into rival camps. Former allies prepared to kill one another. In December 1914, Villa and Zapata met near Mexico City. The meeting brought together the two most famous popular leaders of the revolution. Zapata came from the villages and sugar fields of the South. Villa came from the deserts, mines, and cattle country of the North. Zapata's movement was rooted in a clear demand. Land must be returned to the villages. Villa's movement was broader, more personal, and more dependent on his military authority. Their enemies feared what might happen if the two men formed a permanent alliance. Together, their forces entered Mexico City. A famous photograph captured Villa sitting in the presidential chair beside Zapata. It appeared to be the final victory. The poor had entered the halls of power. The old rulers had fled. The revolution belonged to them. But neither Villa nor Zapata possessed a practical plan for governing the entire country. Zapata wanted to return south to defend his communities. Villa was more comfortable commanding armies than building national institutions. Carranza and Obregón understood what their rivals did not. Taking the capital was not enough. Whoever controlled ports, oil revenue, supply lines, and a functioning administration could survive losing Mexico City. The real battle was still coming. In the spring of 1915, Villa marched against Álvaro Obregón. Villa had built his reputation through speed, cavalry, and aggressive attacks. Obregón had studied the war unfolding in Europe. Across the Atlantic, machine guns, trenches, barbed wire, and concentrated artillery were destroying traditional charges. Obregón prepared to use those same lessons in Mexico. Near Celaya, he ordered his soldiers to dig defensive positions. Machine guns covered open ground. Barbed wire disrupted cavalry. Reserves waited behind the front lines. Villa believed force and courage could break the defenses. Again and again, his men charged. Again and again, machine gun fire cut them down. Horses crashed into wire. Units became trapped in open fields. Ammunition disappeared at a terrifying rate. Villa attacked repeatedly, convinced the next assault would break Obregón's army. It did not. At Celaya, Villa's greatest strength became his greatest weakness. The cavalry charges that had terrified federal armies were thrown against the weapons of modern industrial war. 14 Courage could not stop machine gun bullets. Villa withdrew, then suffered further defeats. The Division of the North began to collapse. Men deserted. Supplies disappeared. Generals changed sides. The enormous army that had carried Villa toward Mexico City was reduced to scattered forces in the north. History often remembers revolutionaries at the moment of victory. But defeat reveals something victory can hide. Villa could inspire men. He could move armies with extraordinary speed. But he struggled to adapt when the nature of war changed. Obregón had not merely defeated Villa's soldiers. He had defeated Villa's way of fighting. Then another blow arrived. In October 1915, the United States recognized Carranza's government. For Villa, the decision felt like betrayal. Earlier in the revolution, he had maintained relationships with Americans along the border. He had purchased weapons and allowed foreign journalists access to his army. He had sometimes been portrayed in the United States as a useful or even heroic revolutionary. Now Washington supported his enemy. Villa's anger deepened. His war became more desperate. His forces attacked civilians connected to foreign businesses. In January 1916, Villistas killed a group of American mining employees near Santa Isabel. Then Villa made the decision that would transform him from a defeated Mexican warlord into the target of an international manhunt. He would attack the United States. Before dawn on March 9, 1916, Villa's forces crossed the border and moved toward Columbus, New Mexico. Columbus was a small town. It also contained an American military garrison. The Villistas entered under darkness. Gunfire erupted. Buildings caught fire. Soldiers and civilians were killed. Residents fled or hid while American troops organized a defense. The attack quickly turned against Villa's men. The defenders used machine guns and drove the raiders back toward Mexico. Villa's forces suffered heavy losses. Militarily, the raid achieved little. Politically, it was explosive. For the first time in generations, a foreign armed force had launched a major attack on a town inside the continental United States. Americans demanded revenge. President Woodrow Wilson ordered Brigadier General John J. Pershing to enter Mexico and capture Villa. Dead or alive, thousands of American soldiers crossed the border. Cavalry rode into Chihuahua. Trucks carried supplies across rough desert routes. Aircraft searched from above. Radio communications connected distant units. It was one of the first major American military operations to combine horses with airplanes, motor vehicles, and modern communications. The force hunting Villa possessed more technology, more equipment, and more resources than he did. But technology could not guarantee victory in the mountains of northern Mexico. Villa knew the terrain. Local villagers sometimes helped him. Others remained silent because they feared his punishment or resented the foreign troops. The deeper Pershing moved into Mexico, the more dangerous the political situation became. Carranza opposed the American presence. Mexican soldiers and American troops came close to creating a wider war. Meanwhile, Villa disappeared. Reports placed him in one village, then another. Some claimed he was wounded. Others claimed he had died. 17 American columns searched canyons, ranches, deserts, and mountain passes. They captured or killed some of Villa's followers. But they never captured Villa. The most powerful manhunt in the region was chasing a shadow. For nearly 11 months, Pershing's expedition remained in Mexico. Then the international situation changed. War was consuming Europe. Relations between the United States and Germany were collapsing. Washington could not remain trapped in a conflict with Mexico while preparing for a possible war across the Atlantic. In early 1917, American forces withdrew. Pershing returned without Pancho Villa. The expedition had tested new military technology and weakened parts of Villa's organization. But its primary target remained free. Villa had survived the United States Army. Yet survival was not victory. The revolution had changed without him. Carranza became president under a new constitution in 1917. Obregón remained a central military force. Zapata was assassinated in 1919 after being lured into an ambush. Villa continued guerrilla warfare in the north, but he could no longer rebuild the enormous army he had once commanded. The Division of the North existed mainly in memory. The trains were gone. The cavalry columns had vanished. Many of his greatest officers were dead, defeated, or serving new masters. Then, in 1920, Carranza himself was overthrown and killed while fleeing Mexico City. The political order changed again. Villa negotiated peace with the new government. He agreed to lay down his weapons. In exchange, he received the hacienda of Canutillo and permission for some of his remaining followers to live there. After a decade of war, Pancho Villa became a landowner. The transformation was extraordinary. The man who had seized estates now lived on one. The outlaw became a retired general. Villa attempted to build a community at Canutillo. Former soldiers worked the land. Children attended school. For a time, it appeared the centaur of the north might die peacefully. But Mexico's new leaders understood that Villa's weapons had not been the only source of his power. His name still inspired loyalty. His presence still frightened politicians. And presidential succession in Mexico remained dangerous. Villa occasionally spoke about politics. Even the suggestion that he might support a candidate or return to public life could disturb the government. 19, he had surrendered his army. He had not surrendered his legend. On July 20th, 1923, Villa traveled through peril. His movements were known. The gunmen were ready. As his car passed, the signal was given. The street exploded with gunfire. Villa died inside the vehicle with several of his companions. The exact chain of responsibility remains debated. Local enemies may have wanted revenge. Powerful political figures may have feared his return. It is possible that different interests cooperated because they all wanted the same thing. A Mexico without Pancho Villa. The assassins killed the man, but they made the legend impossible to control. After his death, Villa became whatever people needed him to be. To some poor communities, he was the man who challenged landowners and distributed food. To revolutionary nationalists, he was a symbol of resistance against dictatorship and foreign power. To families who suffered during his campaigns, he was no hero. His troops committed executions, robberies, and attacks against civilians. Villa could be generous one day and merciless the next. He punished betrayal with terrifying violence. 20, he sometimes treated personal enemies as enemies of the revolution. The truth is more difficult than the legend. Pancho Villa was not a simple champion of justice. But he was not merely a criminal who accidentally entered history. He was created by the world of Porfirio Diaz, a world where wealth existed beside desperate poverty, where the law protected the powerful, where millions were expected to obey without hope of change. Villa understood that anger because he had lived inside it. He gave that anger horses, trains, rifles, and a name the government could not ignore. His greatest victories helped destroy Huerta's dictatorship. His greatest mistakes helped destroy his own army. He reached the capital, but could not control the nation. He defeated old-style armies, but failed against modern defensive warfare. He became famous through American newspapers and cameras, then became America's most wanted enemy. Thousands crossed the border to capture him. None succeeded. But in the end, Villa was defeated by something no cavalry charge could overcome. The revolution moved forward without him. 21 new leaders took power. New institutions claimed the language of the revolution. and the man who had once seemed larger than Mexico became a danger to the government that emerged from the same struggle. Pancho Villa's life reveals the deepest contradiction of revolution. The people who are best at destroying an old world are not always able to build the new one. Some become rulers. Some become martyrs. Some become monsters. And a rare few become all three in the stories people tell about them. More than a century later, Villa still rides through Mexican memory. In songs, films, murals, family stories, political speeches, and arguments that have never truly ended. Was he an outlaw who used the revolution to gain power, or a revolutionary force to live outside laws written for the rich? Perhaps the answer is that Pancho Villa was both. He was not the revolution's perfect hero. He was its most unforgettable contradiction. A poor boy who became a general. 22, a fugitive who became a governor. A defeated commander who survived an army sent to capture him. And an assassinated man whose legend proved harder to kill than he ever was. History remembers Pancho Villa riding at the head of the Division of the North. But behind the legend were thousands of ordinary people who fought, suffered, and died hoping Mexico could become something different. Villa's story was never only the story of one outlaw. It was the story of a country demanding change, and discovering that destroying tyranny was only the beginning. So what was Pancho Villa in the end? A criminal? A liberator? Or a man transformed by a revolution that became too violent for anyone to control? Share your answer in the comments. And subscribe for more cinematic stories about the rulers, rebels, betrayals, and forgotten battles that changed history forever. 23.